Hello, I'm XenoCow, and I want to talk a little bit about what was not said in the announcement video by frozenbyte just the other day. I'll talk a little bit about what was said, but for the most part I want to talk about what was shown but not described, and also some of what the CEO and other developers talked about on Discord in response to people's questions afterward. If you didn't watch the announcement, or don't want to watch the announcement, here's a quick summary of what is planned on being added. The test universe has been split into its own application, so you don't need to re-download versions when switching between the test and live versions of the game. Warp capabilities will be added to all ships, not just capital ships. A 3D map that stores locations of visited locations and your stations. Stations will be able to request to buy and sell resources. If enough player company stations are in one area, they can form a nation that has borders that can detect ships warping through them. They're working on PvE events and have developed automated turrets to help achieve that goal. Rendering of ships at various distances has been improved so that they aren't just blobs all the time. Ship insurance will let you get your ship back if it is destroyed for a price. They're adding a blueprint editor for both stations and capital ships to speed up their design process. The work continues on siege mechanics. Siege is the attacking and defending of stations. The inventory system is being reworked so that all inventories must take up physical space, such as in crates. Players will be able to buy and sell ship blueprints in-game. There will be cosmetics and emote shop, that's likely for real money. Ownership of ships will be simplified to allow easier trading and piracy, and there'll be bug fixes and quality of life changes too. With that out of the way, let's get into the details. One thing to notice here is that shoulder pad there is a new cosmetic as far as I'm aware. I don't know that I've seen it in game before. Overall, this section about the PTU, or what do they call it now, the test universe, is pretty clear, so there's not a whole lot. There was one question on Discord about it. Someone, Ali Ghost, asked regarding the PTU change. Some of us were designing ships there. Will those blueprints get ported to the new version? And Laurie, the CEO, said they shouldn't go anywhere. So hopefully that means that anyone who spent time designing those things will get to keep their ship designs in the new test universe. Also, Laurie added that regarding the STU, I think it's Starbase test universe, opening hours, yes, we will limit if needed. However, in the near future, i.e. the next 4 to 8 months, we will need testing a lot. So that is to say, I think what he means by opening hours is, will the test universe be always available for playing, or will it be a limited scope event, and so maybe like for however many weeks? So it sounds like in the short term, at least once the patches start rolling out to there, that it'll be always available for players, but later on they might slow down or close it 4 times to promote a little bit more play on the live server, and that is something that I do worry a little bit about, that if all the cool stuff is on the test universe, why play in the live? But it's also good to get bug testing done. As for warping, there were quite a few questions about this one, so I'll try to talk about those in no particular order. Lane here asks, how will warping work during PvP? And Laurie responds that it will work similarly, except that since it's not in a safe zone, the charging time will be a lot longer. Bentley asks if the warp needs to be a part, or is it just how fighters work? And so one of the things that wasn't explained in the the announcement, was that every ship has this ability just by default. You just press a button, literally, and then the ship will just be able to warp as long as it's a functioning ship. Big Daddy Sneck asks, the warp marker, does it only show up at the exit point? And Laurie says that at least the exit, but the charging will also be announced to close by ships, so you can tell if someone near you is trying to get away. Pink Goo asks if you'll be able to warp directly into safe zones, and Laurie says that most likely yes, but probably we'll have to test to see how that actually plays out. Then Laurie just pointed out a few things that weren't answers to any particular questions, but he notes that the mass to cost ratio with warping is pretty high, so it'll cost quite a bit to haul ore with warp, but he said that it'll still be cheap considering how far you get to travel. and that warping eats a lot of propellant and a little bit of generator fuel, and it requires, as I mentioned earlier, a complete ship to function. Then we get Medi asking if we'll still be able to walk around on ships while warping, and Lori says yes. Lane asks if you can warp off the surface of a moon or to the surface of a moon, and Lori says that pretty close at least. That's not very clear exactly how far or close to the surface, but presumably somewhat close. Fonzie then asks, will warp disruptors be a thing? And Lori says, yes, but not for the warp we announced, but for a completely different warp. So we'll have to see what that later warp is. That's probably not something we'll see in this round of testing and then the live patch, so it'll be something else in the future. Now let's talk a little bit about the map and the questions that were asked about that. So Frike, he asks that given that the future in-game map is set to make many player-made YOLOL and external projects obsolete when it comes to the topic of navigation, are there any plans in place to try to keep navigation as a viable subject for player-made solutions? Or do you expect navigation to ultimately be taken over by official in-game features over time? Then Lori responds that we love player solutions, so we don't aim to drive them out. That being said, we do have features which the game needs, and we can't hold back even if it would mean some of the player things would suffer. So ISAN is probably something of the past. Zangerous asks, so with the new map system, will there be a way to get map coords position into our ships other than ISAN? So like waypoints can be plugged in as coords into the ship network as values. Lori responds by saying, sounds like yes, but then again, Dusty, who's one of the moderators, and I think he's somewhat part of the team, I'm not exactly sure, said he has forbidden some map features, so maybe. I think some of this is a joke. It's a half joke, I think, but I think that what the main thing is that there will likely not be actual coordinate values ever specified for map things, and they will remain as just locations that can be referenced through the map itself, not through your ship and programming. Ufish asks, and along with a picture of one of the concept arts of maps in the past, will we have icons for said map? Lori says no and yes, we will add LOD models, if known, so if you've found a place, but otherwise generic models. So there will be some sort of 3D model of what is at a location, unlike in the announcement video where each of the points of interest is just a little dot. And lastly, I ask if there are any plans to physicalize the map detection or small ship warp, or if they're just going to be floaty menus, because right now both the map and the ship warp are just menus in game. There's nothing you need to add on your ship. Lori says that they've discussed a holographic map, but it's just a dream, so I suspect that then the first iteration of these will simply be menus and nothing will be needed on the ship to make them work. Moving on to the buy and sell orders that stations can create. One thing that was shown here but not actually addressed is that the orders can have a search radius for how far away you look at other prices. So if you were to only want people who are nearby your station to, or your price to match stations that are near you, you can just look in a small region. But if you want to compete with the entire universe, then you could search a very far distance and set your price accordingly to that. That'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And for the questions and answers, the first one is by Big Daddy Sneck, who asks quite a few questions. I'll do them question, answer. First one is when a player who is not affiliated with a station aims to fulfill a buy order or wants to pick up a sell order, do they have to physically go to the station to do it? Where he says, to fulfill a buy order, they have to bring in the goods. You have to go to the station to actually deposit the items. Number 2, if they do have to go there, how can they interact with the station if they're not part of the faction or otherwise permitted to use the station? Lori responds, buy or sell orders open the station for everyone. So currently, you are not able to go and enter any stations that you are not either friends with the owner or part of the company that owns that station. Number 3, are there any plans to create passively generated buy orders for origin stations? Those are the developer-run stations where the players start out, and other established locations as a form of quest people can fulfill. And Lori says, we've had some discussions. That'd be part of the PvE additions to the game. Number 4, when selling blueprints, do restricted versions come with charges? Lori says, I think they should. That's a little bit moving ahead, but I just want to get Big Daddy Snick's question and answers out of the way. And then number 5, when warping without a proper target, is there a penalty to charge time? 5, no penalty at the moment, other than you most likely will find yourself in the middle of nowhere. Next, also by Big Daddy Snick, a bit more of a follow-up on the orders. Does the player have to interact with another player to fulfill a buy or sell order, or do they simply interact with the station as a whole? Is there sort of trading inventory to the stations that stuff gets held in? Or he says with the station, or more like interface when near the station. So it'll probably be very much like how the auction house works now, how you can access it anywhere near the station. And yet another one by Big Daddy Snick. Okay, last question on orders for now. Can anyone put up orders at a station, since the station with orders is publicly accessible, or can only the station owner do it? Lori says only the owner, and those the owner has allowed to do so. So that'll be good. So you can't join some group and just by being a part of that group open up stations for all sorts of nonsense, but the company will have to allow you to do that kind of thing. Let's see, next, Askanon asks, does one find buy orders of player stations only through clicking on stations, so through the map, or is there a search function with different filters, range, allegiance, etc.? Lori says they show up on the map and on a separate list for everyone, so it should be an easily searchable method instead of having to individually go through and click every single station and then seeing what they want. Kenator asks, will you be able to partially fulfill a buy order, or do you have to do the whole thing? Lori says, partially is okay. So you don't have to be super rich in order to help out and earn a little bit of money. You can have a small ship and just fill a little bit of an order. One thing about establishing a nation that is not mentioned in here or any of the questions, maybe I should have asked it, is that it's unclear what the rules for exactly creating a station are. Can 2 stations make a nation? Can a nation completely enclose another nation so that there's a pocket within it, or does a company have to own the entire volume of their nation in order to take it? There were many questions about the nation additions and lots of good answers to give us a little bit more texture on what that's going to look like. Starting off, Skyguard asks, in response to Lori saying something about conflict would be one reason to have nations. That's a big reason, but there should be some material reason too. The difficult part is that there's just so much space that there will always be unoccupied areas where you can go and simply not deal with other people's territory claims. Lori says, we plan to rearrange the belts to have clear ore areas / pockets. So that one's, of course. So then the ore is going to be less uniform as it is right now. I think there is a little bit of pocketing, but it's very unclear. Dr. Blaze asks, in response to the clustering answer, that it'll have high value together instead of just an even spread of high value areas. And Lori says, we'll make some areas with more clustered rare stuff and some areas with just common stuff, but still enough pockets to form enough places to fight over. Next, Wayward asks a few questions. What is the current thinking around the detection of players when it comes to nation borders? Will it display as unknown until identified, or will they be named as soon as they cross the border? How will map logging work? Is it by transponder detection, or will the player have to do a physical action in order to log the location? Lori says, no decision on the level of information about trespassers, and that logging doesn't require anything other than being there. Alghost asks, can we get a little insight into the passive income stuff? I hoarded up almost 2 billion credits, so kinda curious how quick that will fade away due to inflation. Lori says that I don't think it's inflation, it'll be the cost of owning nations. It's unclear what exactly the cost is going to be, but something will have some sort of cost in owning them. And in continuation of this kind of line of discussion, Whippy asks, you got any information on the Titan asteroids? Those are very large ones that currently you can't mine. Is that going to be any part of passive income for nations? Lori says, sounds logical, but those are so small that they are mined out in no time. I think he later then mentioned something about it being a possible idea, but nothing concrete. And finally, about this line of discussion, Mito asks, taxes? And Lori says, it's kind of a tax, but it's on the house. On the house probably being, as in it just is generated from thin air by the, as in players don't actually have to pay it. So players mine and trade, they lose nothing, but the nation gets a bonus based on activity. Askanon asks, are nations made out of possibly multiple corporation stations, so not just one company? Lori says that eventually that option is planned, but not right away. Maybe it goes into alliance nations or such. Lane asks, will nations be able to encompass parts of moons, so not just in space, if there are enough same company stations on it? Lawyer says hopefully yes, although moons will require bases for it. There are already moon bases. I'm not sure what he means by that. Maybe he just means that you have to put bases on the moon in order to capture that territory. Lee Foman asks who is going to own stations in a nation, individuals or a faction or both. Lawyer says that the company who has made a nation declaration. And then I ask what the point of tracking when ships enter a territory if the warp location is already known. And the lawyer says risk and interactions, its landing point will also be told. So there's a good chance for interception if someone is close enough. I think my question came from the misunderstanding about the warp location showing up after a ship has warped rather than before, and so if you have a nation border, you will get to see where a ship is going to be before it arrives, rather than having to wait until it arrives within your borders and then react to it. So having a border will be helpful in that you can get to potentially your enemy's location before they even arrive to prepare to fight them. For the PvE section, it sounds like a lot of it is still work in progress. However, the Lost Cargo event that they did mention has been actually run before by the developers in-game, so there is a little bit of... they do have some testing with that, but it hasn't been automated. It has been a developer having to go in and manually place items, and then players come and fight over it. As for questions, Mito asks, will players be able to construct the automated turrets for ships? I think that's a question that a lot of players have, and if you're watching AHA, I'm sure you are quite eager to get those automated turrets on your ship. And Laurie responds saying, we'll explore those on the STU, the test universe, and see after that. Beatbreaker asks, I personally hope auto turrets stay PvE and station defense turrets only. Else it'll be a spam of who has the most auto turrets on their small scooters, I feel like. Laurie says the plan is to limit PvE turrets to non-player thingies. That is to say, only put turrets on things that players are not controlling, so I think that it would include stations and perhaps even capital ships. Skyguard asks, finally, speaking of that, that being salvage, all sorts of salvage reclaiming stuff, how would we find wrecks outside the origin visibility range? Wrecks would be the PvE wrecks that are generated automatically. Laurie says, well, basic wrecks will be spawned into the universe. Special wrecks will be events, i.e. they will create a marker on the map. Such could be like 500 to 1000 wreck event or so. I don't know if that means 500 to 1000 wrecks in one place, so just a giant graveyard, or if he means that's the number of players that would be involved. It's likely an overestimation on how many ships will actually be involved in the event, at least anytime soon. Before getting into the questions of the LOD editions, I'm actually really excited about this. I think of all the features, this is the one that interests me the most, because the reason I got into Starbase was I really like the destruction, and so currently you can't really see the destruction on your enemies until they've already exploded and then they just disappear. So it's really cool to be able to see what's actually happening in a fight while the fight's happening. So I look forward to that a lot. Anyway, question time. Kenator asks, I really want to see them push the LOD tech harder. I want to see full cap ship, and I want to see ships load full LOD nearly all the time unless at a huge distance. Kai, who is one of the other developers, he says that the current max station zones is increased from 5 to 20. Doesn't mention anything about the rest of pushing the LOD stuff. Lane asks, is the upload and download speed of LOD going to be a setting in the options menu that players can change so people with higher bandwidths can have more LOD capabilities? And Laurie says that we're planning to move the main ship transfers to our servers. Laurie continues to say that so in the future, to speed up loading of ships, we can transfer the core of a ship from our servers, and peer-to-peer would be used to transfer only changes, so damage, presumably. So currently, the game utilizes Steam-secured and encrypted peer-to-peer, and it includes also ship transfer to others. So that'll be interesting to see how their servers manage that, because it might be that their servers are centralized at their offices, and we'll see how that plays out. I'm curious to see if we'll get better or worse performance. It might depend on where you live. If you're near their servers, maybe it'll be really awesome. If you're far away, then maybe things will be worse than they were before. Or at least if you're farther away from their servers, but closer to the people you're interacting with. It's one of the strange things about Starbase, it's a peer-to-peer system. Anyway, moving on. As for the ship insurance, no one asked any questions that at least got any sort of told us anything new about the insurance process. I think that could be because they're still working on it, and so it's pretty much open question on how it's going to work exactly. Personally, I think that maybe it should work very much like normal real insurance, where if you get into a lot of accidents, then your price is going to go up, but if you don't need to use the insurance for a very long time, then it should be fairly inexpensive. I'll probably not use the insurance too much. I kind of like rebuilding my ships myself instead of getting a free copy or however much the copy costs. We'll see. There are just a few questions about the editors for the capital ships and stations. First off, Oopfish asks, will capital and station editors project a blueprint like what Closed Alpha did, so we don't need the materials all at once? Lori says, blueprint yes, CA, Closed Alpha no, materials not needed. So that probably means that there is a blueprint, but it doesn't project into the world like it did in previous versions of the game. Oopfish then asks, can we use this? And he shows the picture of a robotic arm for building capitals and stations via attaching ships and using ore containers as the inventory. Lori says, you can use the print cap/station button in the editor. So I'm not sure if that means that there are 0 plans for making ships or capital ships and stations via any sort of in-game building, or if Lori just means that for the test universe, you will just press a button and you will get a station or capital ship. Finally, Silent Symphony asks, will the dimensions of stations/capitals be staying the same? Lori says, we will be expanding the limits a lot. There were only a couple of questions about Siege, likely because it's already been in the test universe for some time now. First of all, Boom asks, going off what was announced, the idea that cap ships/stations can be sieged at any point within a defined window. There's no limit on company size versus smaller company size, or company versus solo. I simply don't have the availability, due to, work and other obligations, to constantly defend, much less if it's me versus larger group of players. Lori says, the current implementation and the plan is on 1 siege per week, and smaller ones can define the hours and day that they can be there. Also, initial sieges work only against 1, nation stations, 2, stations inside a nation. So he means, and then he edits, 1 siege per station per week. So not if you have multiple stations, each of those can be sieged once per week, but not multiple times a week. Next, K-Man asks, my only concern is that we now live in a dead universe. In the main game being probably live, lots of stations and space around us, the stations taken by players that might not return. So that's just to say there's lots of stations everywhere that are unused, taking up space. Lori says that nations can siege any station inside their borders. I think this might answer a little bit of my previous question about whether you can create a station around other nations, and so it could very well be that you can encompass other nations or at least other stations and then take them over and potentially remove them or capture them. Pertaining to the new inventory system, Oopfish asks, will there be cargo halls for stations? And Lori says that Lowry, I've been pronouncing his name wrong the whole time, haven't I? Oh well, sorry Lowry. The focus that will be on inventory 2.0, so I think that's to say that instead of a particular place on your station that you have to put all your cargo, you can instead attach cargo crates wherever it is you find suitable, maybe. Then next, how do you say that? This guy with the dragon. When Inventory 2.0 comes out, will there be a hard cap on resources per account? I ran out of space very quickly on both my accounts, and my storage cheese ships got deleted. So there is currently a limit on how much storage you have per station. And so some players have been building giant crates of ships, and then they can put ore into those ships and then store those ships within their stations to increase their amount of storage they have. And Lowry says that obviously we will need to solve blatant exploits, but no plans yet. There are a couple things here about the ship blueprints that are not actually about the ship blueprints, but are shown here in the video. We can see a couple things that are interesting. First of all, there's a trade menu, which has been possible in-game through just dropping items into the world, and if you wanted to transfer money, you could send it's like an email system that's built in the game. You can then send money that way, but there hasn't been a person-to-person trade system where you can each look at each other's offer and then accept it. So that's new, and again, not at all addressed. And the other thing, it's a little bit more subtle, but if you look at I think that's the antigel rifle, it shoots little discs it has those two colored bars next to it. So that is a cosmetically altered version of the rifle. Normally it's just a kind of a blue color. So we might be getting the various color options either user selectable, or maybe we'll just be able to buy particular versions of the various weapons. Again, we were able to in closed alpha. There are special ones you had to go to particular stations for, but maybe we'll be getting that again. That'll be cool. With the cosmetic shop, I think there's been some discussion of that earlier about how it'll be a way to help support the game because it is an MMO, and although it does have a fixed cost at the start, there are at least some development requirements for it, and they have put a lot of time into it. I'm going to leave that discussion for another time, but one thing I have to say about this is there are some really terrible emotes. Some people will like them, but they're a bit too much for me. I don't know. Don't need to see some of these things. Now that we're through the actual video and any questions on that in particular, let's talk first about some logistical questions and responses from the developer. So first thing Lowry says is that the first test universe patch will include at least warp, map, editors, siege, insurance, and LOD improvements. What it will not include is all the also in development stuff, nations, and buy orders. He goes on to say that about their actual development progress, that our bug tracker says 11 critical issues before first test universe patch. We've managed to fix 12 critical issues during the past 3 weeks, but at the same time, it's entirely possible we have not yet found them all. So if they can do 12 fixes in 3 weeks, and there are currently 11, then it might be only 3 weeks until we get our next one. Or maybe it'll be a little faster, a little slower, but maybe about 1 to 2 months. Then we get a question from Invalid. I just arrived after a 3-year hiatus. Will there be a wipe to the main server or a soft relaunch when this new update goes to the stable branch? Lowry says that there are no wipes planned. Major General Relativity says in response to the live update only being launched after all of the stuff in the video has been tested in the test universe, if that also includes the also in development or only the things on screen. And Lowry says everything mentioned in the video needs to be complete and tested before it gets to the live server. Similarly, Wyatt asks, can we expect to at least get ship blueprint updates going on live quickly? The heat update came and a lot of ships are broken. And Lowry says next live update is only after everything in the video is done and tested at the test universe. Though it turns out Wyatt's question is actually about the blueprints in the ship shops, not exactly the update, the new blueprint feature. So the question and answer didn't quite get across to each other, but that's okay. Lucas asks, the video pretty much mentioned so many things I've been always wanting from the game, so easy to say I'm excited. Looking forward to the test universe to try all those things out, then to play casually again once those drop to live. And then he asks, is there any ETA on how much time after the new stuff first drops on the STU that it'll come to live? Larry says, glad to hear. STU updates will come in a few chunks. First, maybe within 1 to 2 months or so. Again, I think there's a little bit of miscommunication here, but that 1 to 2 months does add up with the 3 weeks for the last 12 bug fixes. And finally, for logistical things, Major General Relativity asks, but does frozenbyte have any new investors for Starbase? Additional rounds of investment from previous investors, or is this just all internally funded? And Lowry says it is internally at this point, so there's no new funding sourcing, which also means that the team is going to be a little bit smaller for some time. Next, here are some questions and answers about the announcement itself or the company. So they're not exactly logistical, but they're a little bit related. And so similar to the previous question about funding, Whippy asks, is this for real this time? You're not going to turn around and stop after 3 months. And Lowry says, we've been working on this update for almost a year already, so a lot of things listed in this video are already done. I think that's just him trying to give some assurance that they're not going to disappear again, at least they don't plan to anytime soon. But Whippy clarifies, he means, are we going to see what happened like last time? Are you here permanently now, or is this still a temporary thing that can still shut down if things go poorly? And Lowry says, I'd like to say we're here for good, but our business is pretty volatile. All I can say is that we've seen some real stuff and survived for 23 years already. So hopefully the company's not going anywhere and we will actually get to see Starbase improved. We'll see. Fonzie asks Kai, the other developer who he jumped in earlier, and he's also the voice in the video, I think. I have a question. Is there a secret in the video that I need to find? Lowry says there was, but Kai removed it, because there were previously in some of the early trailers for the game some secrets and a little scavenger hunt. Then Ooffish asks, is there anything about a new roadmap soon? And Lowry says yes, and it's I think he's referring to, he says above maybe 3 to 5 minutes ago. What he's referring to is here's the things that need to be finished before we release the patch. And then Ufish clarifies. He says he wants a picture, and Lowry then responds, we're pretty thin on the team still, but we'll see. Maybe we'll get an actual roadmap picture that'll be a little bit easier to digest than this whole mess. And then Ufish asks, will old ship shops be removed due to inactive updating? And will there be weekly or bi-weekly or monthly progress reports starting at some point? And Lowry responds to the progress report side and says that on behalf of Kai, I can promise at least monthly, but hopefully bi-weekly updates. That'll be nice to get some actual progress reports again, because we used to get those, I think they were weekly. We got weekly progress reports during closed alpha and then just afterward for a little bit as well. And with that, that is everything about the announcement that we know so far. This was way too long and got out of hand, so I'm going to wrap it up quick. This is XenoCow, signing off. Unsubscribe, dislike, go away. Go have some lunch. Call your mom. Alright, bye.